I don't care what the records are. I don't care how ugly the football might look. The look on the television screen, and I'm sure in person, is just even beyond that. And then it's still a rivalry in college football. So USC, UCLA still does it for me. We got Tony Siracusa on the line from Last Word on College Football. Please check out his work right there. Tony, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I am doing just fine. And there's been several years now that we've spoken the week of the USC game.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly gotten your take on what makes this one special, what makes it unique. It stands out to me, and I know that you possibly recall my version or my perspective on this, living and growing up in the Midwest, watching, let's say, Ohio State, Michigan, or Nebraska, Oklahoma back in the day when that, yes, if you're under 30, that was a huge rivalry. Nebraska, Oklahoma, I didn't mix up teams. And it just being typically not so much as bad as New Year's Day, when you could almost guarantee it's about 16 degrees outside and dank and dark. Last weekend, it could be 65, it could be 25 in Ohio, but usually not the best of weather. And man, it just brightens up the screen when they transition from Ann Arbor, Michigan out to the Rose Bowl or the Coliseum, and you see those the uniform clash of the colors just is magical to me. It's just a beautiful setting of college football when those two teams get together.
Yeah, look, I agree. Like you, I grew up out here on the West Coast where you watched the Michigan-Ohio State game in the morning. Then you had the UCLA-USC game on after that. And in a huge number of years, those two games determined who was going to the Rose Bowl. So it was a big deal. And you had Oklahoma, Nebraska, the winner of the Big Eight. Google that, youngsters, Big Eight, went to the Orange Bowl and so on. And so it was always a big deal. And for people who don't remember, UCLA and USC actually used to share the Coliseum. And UCLA played there until 1982 and 83. They moved to the Rose Bowl and made that their home stadium. But that is part of the tradition of both teams wearing their home uniforms for the game. And so, as you said, on TV, it's just, bursting with the color of fall in Southern California and the pageantry of the game. And you and I have talked about it before, about how this is such a unique series, because if you look at all the big rivalry games, and of course you and I follow them all, this is the only one in the Power Five conferences where the two schools share the same city. These two schools are 12.5 miles apart from each other. In the off season, these guys are going to the same parties at the same people's houses. High school teammates now on opposite sides of the field in a bitter rivalry, and so it's unique in that I know a lot of the rest of the country, it's the Pac-12, or as you said, the records aren't great. And so, look, it's not the Iron Bowl. It's not Michigan, Ohio State. It's not, Florida State, but it is unique in that these guys live and breathe with each other in their backyards 365 days a year. And so that makes it different than the rest of them.
It would be interesting, Tony, if somebody wants to take this on. I certainly am not up to the task and don't want to do it. There are a lot of things regarding recruiting rankings and records that I would love to see, all sorts of compilations of things, but I don't want to do the math and the work. But this would be one of them, to take the percentage of those two rosters, not just for 1 year, but over a span of time, and see how many of those kids did play against each other and how many of them did play within a certain proximity of the city would be intriguing.
Well, it's interesting. When we were at UCLA practice earlier this week and talked to Chip Kelly, and we had a chance to talk to Kyle Phillips, the UCLA receiver, and we asked him. He's a redshirt freshman, played in 4 games last year, but managed to get the red shirt. Has been a vital part of whatever level of success Dorian Thompson-Robinson has this year. And Phillips just rattled off a whole list of players on the SC roster that he played with in high school, played against in high school, or in the local 7-on-7 camps, and he just started rattling off a whole list of guys that he sees on a regular basis. And that's just one story in 1 week, in microcosm. You look at it big picture, and it's the way this is every year.
We'll turn the page back a week and let you have to take us through that 49-3 drubbing at Utah. That I did my best to hype up that game, Tony, and I was factually correct. I was factually correct in everything I said. UCLA had destiny or /fate within its hands of capturing the Pac-12 South Division. Technically, it was right there for the taking and winning the final 3 games of the season to win the Pac-12 South Division. And but it quickly became a non-game or a non-factor with the Utah just brute force, just imposing its will on both sides of the ball, and UCLA certainly playing into that with a number of mistakes. And the way the Bruins played the previous 3 weeks, not against nearly that tough a competition, but they were a much improved football team. Prior to that, it had to be disappointing that they didn't at least put up a good fight for a half or so.
Yeah, it was ugly pretty early on, and we had talked about it. And yes, you did your role. You played your role in trying to pump up their odds for the Pac-12 South, contending for the title in the Pac-12 South. But one of the things we had talked about in previewing that game was just how brutally physical Utah is, how strong they are on the defensive line and their front seven, and that really showed out last week. The UCLA left side of the line, with true freshman Sean Ryan and true freshman Duke Clemens, just got abused by the Utah front seven. There was too much of that first half where Dorian Thompson-Robinson was scrambling for his life. How he was scrambling is another part of the problem, but he was scrambling for his life. And when you go back and look at the film again, every time it was seeping through that left side of the UCLA line. It was pretty horrendous. Now, to the Dorian Thompson-Robinson problem, and Chip Kelly, strangely enough, this week denied seeing this in any of the tape. But Robinson, for whatever reason, he did this earlier in the year as well. When he started scrambling, he was scrambling backwards. It was almost a retreat. And so instead of a potential 4-yard loss, it was an 8-yard loss or a 9-yard loss. He didn't have the wherewithal to chuck the ball away as frequently as he should have. Again, he was scrambling like crazy. The turnovers from UCLA were just dreadful. The interceptions from DTR, fumbles, once again, fumbled inside the Utah 20 when he wasn't even touched. Just lost control of the ball. UCLA had multiple trips inside the Utah red zone in the first half and got 1 field goal out of it. And, that's all they got for the entire game. But just even in that first half, you were never going to be competitive when you come away with virtually nothing at that point, when it's just the field goal and then they had a missed field goal, and it just starts to steamroll. And, you find yourself just giving Utah a short field to play on the rest of the half. And by halftime, the game was well out of hand. And there really was no upside to UCLA's performance in that game. I know if you're a fan, you try picking through some things and say, well, we did this well, we were competitive. You weren't competitive. You weren't competitive from the first quarter on. DTR had a terrible game. The offensive line had a terrible game. The defensive secondary got abused by Tyler Huntley, missed tackles, poor execution. There really wasn't anything good to take away from last week's game.
Talking USC, UCLA, not Utah anymore. We're done with the Utes. Yes, they're a really good football team, and they have cemented basically, albeit a unforeseen catastrophe in the final 2 games, going on to the Pac-12 championship game to possibly play Oregon, as we would expect. That's been the matchup that most people have seen over the last half of the season, at least.
Should be a good game.
It should be a great game. It should be an exceptional game, and hopefully 2 11-1 teams will square off for the sake of the Pac-12. But we're talking UCLA and USC, and I don't think, in regards to status of the two squads, talent level, personnel, resumes coming into the game, it's much different than what we saw a year ago, in which UCLA came in as a 2-9 football team.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that was the last game of the season, and UCLA's got one more after this one against USC as the Trojans play the odd bye week that prepares them for, they're not making the Pac-12 championship game, so it doesn't really benefit them at all, except to say, hey, we got some extra time off.
Sure.
But UCLA or USC comes in at 7-4, and that's roughly where the two teams stood. Although USC, let's see, was 5-6 last year, but looked to be decidedly the better team. Should have been a substantial favorite. They were not an overwhelming favorite, but they are again this year. And what's UCLA going to need to get accomplished here to pull off the upset?
It's an interesting game because when you look at the teams through each team through their season, USC started the season 3-3, had a brutal first 6 weeks of a schedule, and then they won 4 out of the last 5. They beat up on Cal last week. Cal is a catastrophe of a team right now, but it's been an interesting ride for the Trojans because Clay Helton, of course, has spent the entire season on the hot seat, even as they win 4 out of their last 5. There are assumptions that he won't be back next year. The new athletic director and the new president will want someone else. But part of what bought him some leeway this year was having to go to 3 different quarterbacks during the season because of injury. They started JT Daniel. They had to go to, in the season opener, had to go to backup Keaton Slovis. At some point, Slovis gets hurt. They go to Matt Fink. Slovis, his concussion clears up. He's fine. And Slovis has had a terrific freshman season. I mean, if you're asking me, JT Daniels is going to be looking for another program in the offseason because he's not getting his job back and he's not likely to sit down as a backup. But, Slovis has completed 70% of his passes this year. I mean, he's having a fantastic season. And he's got a wealth of wide receivers. And this is one of the things we talked to Chip Kelly about is you got Michael Pittman as the highlight wide receiver, if you will, for USC. He's got great hands. He's tall. He's athletic. But they've also got Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they got Tyler Vaughns, and they've got a lot of talent there. And so, UCLA has its hands full as the, off the top of my head, I think the 104th ranked defense in the country. They've got their hands full because they don't typically get a good pass rush on the quarterback this season, very rarely. But you got to put some pressure on Slovis because you can't have him just sit back in the pocket with all of those weapons and expect the Darnay Holmes of the world to, the Stephen Blaylocks to be able to keep man-to-man coverage on everybody. So I don't think you have to fear USC's running game that much. I mean, we're not talking about Zach Moss in Utah last week, Moss being one of the best running backs in the country. It's a pedestrian running game. And so I think you really need to scheme defensively to get Keaton Slovis out of his comfort zone as much as you can and make him move around in the pocket. Don't let him sit back and have the choice of 3 all conference or all American wide receivers to go to because you're asking to get picked apart. On the other side of the ball, USC's defense is 71st in the country. UCLA's offense is 78th in the country. They were higher, but that Utah game dropped them 10 spots. It's a matter of which Dorian Thompson-Robinson shows up for UCLA on Saturday. Is it the DTR that we saw in the second half of the Washington State game or the Colorado game or the Arizona State game where he's decisive back in the pocket and he's making quick decisions? When he's scrambling for a purpose, pick up some yards, get out of bounds, live to play, the next play. Or is it the one that we saw early in the season and again reemerged in the Utah game, who is trying to make plays where plays don't exist, scrambling so much in the backfield, trying to extend a play that you get a resulting turnover? Or instead of losing 4 yards, you're losing 8 yards, like we talked about a few minutes ago, because he's in full retreat mode. That, when he's looking at his receivers, he's taking too long to get through progressions and find the guy. He's trying too hard to make the spectacular play. Which one shows up? That is, look, you look at any game and you say, oh, the offensive line is the key. They need to protect the quarterback. Well, no kidding. That's true in every matchup. He has to be able to have a good game. It doesn't have to be spectacular. It can be the 21 out of 28 that he, for 250 yards, that seems to be in his bailiwick most of the season, because that'll give you enough offense to go to Josh Kelly then also. But if DTR is having a bad game, and you're trying to rely on Josh Kelly too much, that SC front seven is just going to sit up there and close everything off for Kelly, and the yards are going to be tough. There has to be balance in the UCLA offense. They've got to have a decent game out of DTR. Again, doesn't have to be spectacular. Doesn't have to do what he did in the second half against Washington State in terms of statistics, but he's got to do that in terms of style of play and ability of execution, so that then you can get some production from Martell Irby or Kaz Allen, or most likely Joshua Kelly.
We're at a point in the season in which there's so much overlap between common opponents for two teams that play in the same division that I finally get to the point where I'm comfortable looking at the overall stats and thinking, okay, there is some meaning here. And for USC versus UCLA right now, USC's outscoring its opponents by 4.5 points a game. UCLA's being outscored by 7 points per game. UCLA is outgained 50 yards per game, and USC is outgaining its opponents by 42 yards per game. And again, we're talking about having played the same division schedule, which is another 4 teams, and then playing 2 to 3 to 4 teams the same in the other division. Of course, it's a 9-game conference season. And then the Oklahoma game was certainly an outlier in regards to level of play versus USC playing Notre Dame, which was not as, you wouldn't say at this point in the season, as good as Oklahoma, but close. And they played very difficult non-conference schedules, both of them. So I think those stats mean something, and it adds up to USC being an 82% pick by the ESPN Power Index and a 13.5-point favorite against UCLA. Joshua Kelly, he shows up in these games sometimes, but so maybe he might have something to say about this.
Well, yeah, he had a great game last year. UCLA's offense was in a little bit of we'll call it a mature rhythm, because if you remember, it was Wilton Spate who played the SC UCLA game last year. And so, and Spate had played in the big games before, having been in Michigan. And so there was a little bit of a maturity in terms of being able to move the ball downfield, move the sticks, don't go for more than you need to go for. And again, it gave that opening to Joshua Kelly. The offensive line did a very good job. The holes were there. And Kelly had one of those games that, when it's like any rivalry game, when it's a USC UCLA game, no matter what you've done the rest of the season or even the rest of your career, even if you have no pro career after this, you get a game like Kelly did with his, I think it was 289 yards and 4 touchdowns last year against SC. You are a Bruin legacy, or if you do it on the other side, you are a Trojan legacy forever, regardless of what happens the rest of your career. And Kelly had one of those games. He doesn't have to have that kind of game again, but he's got to be able to be productive. He's got to, UCLA can't miss chances in the red zone like they did against Utah. USC is not at the Utah level, but you have to capitalize on the times there. And those are the times when you've got to utilize Kelly the most.
The hopes of getting to a bowl game, of course, rest on beating its rival, and this USC-UCLA game. And for the Bruins, as Tony pointed out, it's Cal the next week at home. So UCLA getting to 6-6 in postseason play after the start they got off to and the way they look, Tony, would be just tremendous.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I mean, if you wind up 6-6 after you started the year 1-5, and people were calling for Chip Kelly's skull. It's not going to happen, of course. No matter how this season finishes either, because UCLA is in flux with its athletic director, with Dan Guerrero retiring in June. He's certainly not going to pull the trigger and hire his 5th football coach in his tenure on the way out the door. And they're not going to make an announcement on a new athletic director until sometime late April, early May. That alone gives Kelly job security, whether he wins the next 2 or not. But what it does do is it's going to impact greatly the recruiting, as it does in all things Southern California, when you're competing for all the great local high school talent that exists out here, but you're competing against USC. UCLA moved up, 30 slots in most of the recruiting rankings over the last month as they went on that winning streak. And USC, while it was in its turmoil with Helton and the athletic director and who's going to be hired, actually dropped down considerably into the low 70s. Those are the things that are a big, big deal in this town. But you got to win Saturday to capitalize on that and keep that momentum going. If UCLA wins this game and can beat a really bad Cal team and wind up 6-6, you're going to a 3rd-tier bowl game. You're going to wind up at the, I think probably the Cheez-It Bowl. It used to be the Cactus Bowl down in Tucson. That's fine. It's a 3rd-tier bowl. UCLA fans don't travel well. They'll get, 1,000 UCLA fans down there for the game during the holidays. But from a program standpoint, that's fine. There's a huge step from 3-9 last year, 1-5 starting this season, an unsatisfied fan base, the attendance, plummeting at the Rose Bowl for home games. That 6-6 will get you a long way, but you got to get to that 6-6.
To clarify the scenarios, Utah's at 6-1, USC 6-2, UCLA 4-3. Therefore, USC, of course, needs to beat UCLA, and they need to hope that Utah loses, one of 2 of its final games in the Pac-12. That creates a 2-way tie. USC won the head-to-head. They would win the division, go to the Pac-12 championship game. To note, the rarity of rarities is that UCLA beats USC. Utah loses its final 2 games. There's a 3-way tie at 6-3. I'm not looking that up. What happens there, because UCLA would have beaten USC, but USC beat Utah and Utah beat UCLA. So then it goes down to division record, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It gets into a whole level of minutia. And one thing to point out, if you're going to look at a USC winning the Pac-12 South and going to the conference championship game, not to rain on anyone's parade, but SC took a beat down from Oregon just a couple of weeks ago. Oregon is that good. And, right now, if the season ended today, sorry, college football playoff panelists, but you're wrong. Oregon deserves a shot, and they are that good. So, yeah, there's some interesting scenarios. Oregon's got a relatively easy finish, to the season. And USC gets this one game, and then, like you said, has the unusual situation of getting to basically sit home and watch the season play out elsewhere, having rooting interest in what goes on.
It's USC and UCLA, and worth watching, even if it's just to test the brightness on your television screen and the fervency of the colors. It just is eye-popping again. The setting just gets to me. It just speaks college football and takes me back to my childhood when I see USC and UCLA on the screen. Let's see, where are they playing this year?
Coliseum. They're playing the USC home game, so it'll be
takes a little bit off of it, but
it'll be at the renovated Coliseum. The USC pumped a lot of money into that to renovate it, and wound up putting in seats that are right next to the press box, so you actually can't see the field. So now they just don't sell. There's about 1,000 seats that they don't even sell because you can't see. But don't know who planned that out. But nonetheless, it'll be at the Coliseum. And it'll be interesting. USC leads the series. Like I said, this is the 89th version of it. So USC leads the series 47 wins, 32 losses for USC, 7 ties back in the old day when they had ties. And if you are quickly doing the math, that does not equal 88 games, which they have had so far. SC had to vacate 2 of them with with NCAA sanctions over the years. But like I said, the names, if you just Google it, the names of the players who play in this game and compete in this game, it's a college football Hall of Fame. And you see some great games with guys who would never be known across the country anywhere, but they're legends in this game. You know, guys like John Barnes or Georgia Chica from SC, or Norm Johnson from UCLA, guys like that had the one good game, the one memorable game in the rivalry game, and they're heroes forever.
Although Norm Johnson was quite the kicker at
True.
Seattle in the NFL.
True. A lot of people don't remember that, because it was so long ago.
That's why I'm here for you, Tony. Tony Siragusa from Last Word on College Football, breaking down USC and UCLA. Tony, enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Mark.